So now we are going to embark on a description of the axial and appendicular skeletal muscles, followed by the main subject of our lecture today, the axial and skeletal muscles themselves. So axial and appendicular skeletal muscles are attached to the axial and appendicular skeleton respectively. Remember that the axial skeleton includes the skull, the vertebral column, the ribs, and the sternum and the hyoid bone, but that's not really attached to anything, and we won't talk about it further. The axial skeletal muscles move the head, the neck, and vertebral column. They move the rib cage to help breathing, and they also help to support the abdominal organs. Appendicular skeletal muscles move the pectoral girdle and upper limbs and the pelvic girdle and lower limbs, and they will be discussed in future lectures. And here's just an encyclopedic picture from Martini's showing you as many major superficial skeletal muscles and just superficial skeletal muscles, either axial skeletal muscles or appendicular skeletal muscles seen in an anterior and a posterior view. It's just a reference picture for you to use if it helps. There are four groups of axial skeletal muscles. They are muscles that move the head and the neck, muscles that move the vertebral column, muscles that move and support the rib cage and the walls of the abdominal cavity, and muscles that move and support the floor of the pelvic cavity. So here we have the list of muscles that move the head and the neck. So that would be number one. They are on the left side of this list of axial skeletal muscles. And then we move on to muscles that move the vertebral column, muscles that move the rib cage and are involved in respiration, muscles that move and support the abdominal areas of the body, and finally, muscles that move the pelvic floor. So first we will discuss muscles that move the head and the neck, including muscles for chewing and moving the eyes, face, and neck. Muscles of mastication are involved in chewing. Extraocular muscles move the eyes. Muscles of facial expression move the face and are important for nonverbal communication, such as smiling, laughing, frowning, looking angry, looking disgusted, etc. And then muscles that move the head. Only some of the muscles of the head and the neck will be learned. As much as the list may look long when looking at the muscles that move the head and the neck, it is very much an abbreviated list. All right, so we will start with muscles of mastication. The muscles of mastication include the masseter, temporalis, medial pterygoid, and lateral pterygoid. This word that starts with a P is said pterygoid. The P is silent. The muscles of mastication or chewing are attached to the skull and the mandible. They act on the temporomandibular joint. The masseter is the most powerful. The temporalis acts as a synergist to the masseter. The pterygoids move the mandible from side to side, helping to grind up food. And here we have a picture. The masseter and the temporalis muscles are easily seen on the side of the skull. And here we have in the lower picture a cutaway of the mandible. So we're looking at structures that lie under the masseter and temporalis. And by cutting away the mandible and also cutting the zygomatic arch, we're able to see the lateral pterygoid and the medial pterygoid, which actually lie on the medial surface of the mandible. So now we will discuss each of the muscles in turn. We will go over their origin, their insertion, and their action. The masseter originates on the zygomatic arch. It inserts on the mandible, and the action is to elevate the mandible. The temporalis originates in an area on the side of the skull called the temporal fossa. It's an area that includes the surface of more than one bone. It's a wide spread attachment, so the area can be thought of as the whole side of the skull. The temporalis inserts on the mandible on the coronoid process. So in the bottom picture, the zygomatic arch is cut so that you can see the coronoid process of the mandible and see that the temporalis muscle is attached to it or inserted on it. The action is to elevate the mandible. Remember that the masseter is the agonist and the temporalis is the synergist in the movement elevating the mandible. The medial pterygoid originates on the medial pterygoid process and inserts on the medial surface of the mandible. It moves the mandible anteriorly and right to left. The lateral pterygoid originates on the lateral pterygoid process, which is a process on the sphenoid bone, and inserts on the mandible on the condylar process, which remember is the posterior process of the ramus of the mandible. The action is to move the mandible anterior and right to left. The picture on the right in the lower panel shows the inferior skull, a view of the inferior skull, and it shows the medial pterygoid, almost looking like the same as the masseter, but on the other side of the mandible, the medial side rather than the lateral side of the mandible. And then the lateral pterygoids, which actually are almost perpendicular to the medial pterygoids. How do you know which pterygoid is medial and which is lateral? The pterygoid that is closer to the midline of the skull is called the medial pterygoid. The one that lies outside or lateral to the medial pterygoid is called the lateral pterygoid. So that was the four muscles of mastication: the masseter temporalis, medial pterygoid, and lateral pterygoid. Now we will move on to the extraocular muscles. There are 6 of them. All of them move the eyeball. They are called extraocular because they are on the outside of the eyeball. Yes, you're right. There are also intraocular muscles inside the eyeball. The 6 muscles are the superior rectus, the inferior rectus, the lateral rectus, and the medial rectus, the superior oblique, and the inferior oblique. Rectus means straight, so this is giving the location of the muscle, followed by the fact that it is a straight muscle. In the pictures on the side, please take note of where the nose is so that you can orient yourself. Both of these pictures are of a right eye, and I chose all pictures of the right eye so that the nose will be on the same side of the picture when you are learning, right? And here we see a superior rectus. It is superior to the eyeball. An inferior rectus, inferior to the eyeball. Lateral rectus and medial rectus, exactly where we would expect them, lateral and medial to the eyeball. And then the more complicated superior oblique and inferior oblique. All 5 extraocular muscles, not all 5, 5 of the 6 extraocular muscles originate on the posterior bony orbit of the eye around the optic canal. And here they've removed the eyeball so that you can just see the origins of these 5 muscles. One muscle originates on the anterior medial bony orbit. All of the muscles insert on the sclera, or the outside of the eyeball. The sclera is the whole white part of the eyeball. So if we look at our picture, we see the superior rectus and the inferior rectus on the superior and the inferior edges of the optic canal here, and then the lateral and the medial rectus on the lateral and medial edges of the optic canal here. And then we see that very close to these 4 muscles, there's the origin of the superior oblique. I will describe the superior oblique's origin and insertion more in a few slides. And down here, we have the inferior oblique, which we see is actually not attached at the optic canal. The inferior oblique is the one muscle that originates in another spot, actually on the anterior medial bony orbit. Now, the actions of the muscles are all different. The superior rectus makes the eye look up. The inferior rectus makes the eye look down. The lateral rectus makes the eye look laterally, and the medial rectus makes the eye look medially. The superior oblique makes the eye look down and laterally, and the inferior oblique makes the eye look up and laterally. Now, I will just go over the superior oblique origin, insertion, and action separately, followed by doing the same for the inferior oblique, because these are the challenging muscles to understand. So the origin of the superior oblique is the posterior bony orbit, as we saw. Then the muscle runs anteriorly along the medial surface of the orbit, passes through the trochlea, which is a sling of connective tissue attached to the bony orbit that acts as a pulley, changing the direction of force of the superior oblique muscle. Then the tendon of the superior oblique keeps going and ends up inserting on the superior lateral eyeball. And as mentioned, this causes the eye to look down and laterally. I know that it's a little difficult to imagine how the movement of this muscle is causing the eyeball to look down, to roll down and laterally, but just do your best to think it through. This is a superior view of the superior oblique. So we're looking down from the top of the eyeball perspective. And never mind all of these little lines. It's just the only picture that I could find that had such a good view of the superior oblique. Try to figure out the action there. The action is actually more complicated, but for now, just try to figure out the superior oblique acting to make the eyeball roll and to help us look down and laterally. The inferior oblique originates on the anterior medial bony orbit and it runs under the eyeball like a little strap, and then it inserts on the lateral posterior eyeball. The inferior oblique causes the eye to look up. And again, it's a little hard to visualize. Look at the models in class. We have some really good models, and try to use the models to help you to learn the actions of the muscles, in particular, the superior and inferior oblique muscles. All right, so now moving on to the muscles of facial expression, which everybody likes, usually. And there are quite a few, but they are certainly not all of the muscles of facial expression. We will learn about the occipitofrontalis, which sometimes is described as two separate muscles, the frontalis and the occipitalis. Either one is okay. If I have a tape on a particular area, you can describe this muscle as the occipitofrontalis, or you could say if it was on the frontalis, or if it was on the occipitalis part, the occipitalis. The orbicularis oculi, which is a sphincter muscle that surrounds the eye. The corrugator supercilii, which is the wrinkler of the eyebrow muscle. The zygomatic us, major and minor. The word zygomatic actually means yoke, as in a yoke that you put on the neck of an oxen. It just happens to be the Latin word that they used. The risorius, which is the laughing muscle. The buccinator, which is the trumpet blower muscle. The orbicularis oris, which is a sphincter muscle that surrounds the mouth. The depressor anguli oris, which literally translates to the lowerer of the angle of the mouth. And the platysma, which is a flat muscle. The muscles of facial expression are thin sheets that lie over the skull. Most originate on the skull. The epimysium, or outermost connective tissue layer of the muscles, is continuous with the collagen fibers of the dermis of the skin. So when these muscles contract, the skin moves and a facial expression forms. And here's just a reference picture and another reference picture. If a muscle is left out of the reference picture, you can look at the bottom, and sometimes I've called your attention to the fact that the muscle is not shown. Some of the pictures are missing quite a few of the muscles, but you can just, sort through. They've kind of selected muscles to highlight in some of these little pictures. In others, for example, slide 72, they've included all of the muscles that we're going to study in addition to other muscles that we're not. Okay, so the occipitofrontalis, it has two muscle bellies connected by a sheet of connective tissue. The frontalis originates on a sheet of connective tissue called the epicranial aponeurosis that lies over the top of the head and goes all the way towards the back of the skull, and it inserts on the eyebrows. The action is to elevate the eyebrows and wrinkle the forehead. The occipitalis, the other muscle, originates on the posterior occipital and temporal bones and inserts on the epicranial aponeurosis, and its action is to retract the skull. So overall, you get a pull from the muscle that is pulling the scalp over the bones of the skull, wrinkling the forehead. And here on the side, I have a picture, both of the muscles and also of the expression that the action of this muscle causes the face to make. And the expression here is one of surprise. The corrugator supercilii is the wrinkler of the eyebrow muscle. The origin is the medial brow ridge. The insertion is on the eyebrow. The action is to draw the eyebrows medially and inferiorly. The picture over here shows that the expression created is one of a frown, like a sort of angry frown. The orbicularis oculi muscle surrounds the eye. The origin is the bony orbit around the eye. This insertion is the skin around the eye. And the action is to close the eye, to squeeze the eyes shut, we might say. And over here, if you were going to describe an expression that might be made by closing the orbicularis oculi around one eye, would be a wink. It's given a very weak-hearted little wink there. The zygomatic major and minor. The zygomatic bone is the origin of both the major and minor. The minor is medial and superior to the major, which is lateral and inferior to the minor. Both of them are sort of oblique muscles. So yeah, the action of the major is to elevate and draw the corner of the mouth laterally, and the action of the minor is to elevate the upper lip. So the major makes an expression that is a smile. Here we have Ariana Grande smiling, whereas the expression that the zygomatic minor makes is a sneer. It's lifting the upper lip. Okay. They can both act together to make a big smile, but if taken separately, the zygomatic minor makes a sneer. The risorius, the laughing muscle, originates on the masseter, and the parotid gland fascia, the parotid gland lies over the masseter. So the lower lateral face. The insertion is the skin at the corner of the mouth. The action is to draw the corners of the mouth laterally, not upwards, not to elevate the corners of the mouth, but to draw the corners of the mouth laterally or straight across. Still, the risorius is described as making a sort of smile, but maybe not such a happy smile as the zygomatic major. The buccinator is the trumpet blower muscle. The origin is the maxilla and the mandible, and the insertion is the corner of the mouth and upper lip. The action is sucking, compressing the cheeks, and creating a stream of air against pressure. In babies, the buccinator is important for creating suction during breastfeeding. In adults, the buccinator is able to compress the cheeks, which is helpful when chewing. If food gets pushed off the surfaces of the teeth laterally towards the cheeks, the buccinator can push the food backwards towards the surface of the teeth. The buccinator also helps to create a stream of air against pressure, as in when playing a trumpet or blowing up a balloon. And here we have a picture of the buccinator. It would have the action of blowing in this picture because Louis Armstrong, a famous trumpet player, is blowing on the trumpet. The orbicularis oris is the muscle surrounding the mouth. It originates on the maxilla and the mandible. It inserts on the lips, and the action is to compress and purse the lips. It is a sphincter muscle. And if we look over here, suppose that you can interpret the picture as showing a facial expression of a kiss. The depressor anguli oris is the lower of the angle of the mouth. The origin is the body of the mandible. The insertion is the corner of the mouth. And the action is to depress and draw the corners of the mouth laterally. And you see over here, the expression it makes is of a frown, but a sad frown, not like necessarily an angry frown, kind of sad. And finally, the platysma, which is a flat muscle. The origin is the fascia of the pectoralis major and deltoid. Yes, the origin is the inferior attachment here. The insertion is the mandible and the cheek. And the action is to tense the skin of the neck and also to depress the mandible. And I have named this expression the gulp expression, as in when in a cartoon they make a little character go gulp. Now, just for your interest and for fun, here are some facial expressions, and underneath each expression is what muscle is allowing that expression to be performed. Sometimes it's a single muscle like the occipitofrontalis or the corrugator supercilii, but sometimes in the third panel we see here he's wrinkling up his nose, and that requires actions of two muscles, neither of which we studied. Anyway, it's just for you to look at and have fun with. All right.